Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, What is Life After Coronavirus? Cyber Risk in Telecommuting, presented by Ray & Associates, a top 100 regional CPA and business consulting firm with offices across Ohio. My name is Imani Fields, and I will be moderating today's presentation. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items to cover. First, if you have any questions during today's presentation, you may enter them into the chat box on your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as we can at the conclusion of today's presentation. However, to be respectful of your time, we will aim to conclude today's webinar at 11. In doing so, we know that there is a chance some questions will remain unanswered. Following today's webinar, we will review the unanswered questions and send out our responses via email as soon as we can. You will also receive the recording of today's presentation as well as a link to participate in a very short evaluation. Please take a few minutes to share your thoughts about the presentation as a whole, the information provided, and our presenters. Your feedback is important as we determine future webinar topics related to the COVID-19 crisis. Also, if you would like a copy of today's slide, you will find them available in the handout section of the webinar dashboard on your computer screen. Today's presentation will be given by Sean Richardson and Brian Garland. Sean Richardson is a principal at Ray & Associates, as well as a retired U.S. Army Master Sergeant and former cybersecurity advisor to the Army Reserve Cyber Operations Group and the U.S. Cyber Command. With more than 25 years of information systems engineering and cybersecurity operations experience, he leads the firm's cybersecurity services team. Sean is committed to help guide the small to mid-sized businesses of America down the path of entrepreneurial freedom without the risk of compromise. Brian Garland, a manager at Ray & Associates, is a hands-on member of the firm's cybersecurity and data protection services team. In this role, he was responsible for conducting IT risk assessments and control reviews for clients across the firm's multi-office footprint. Ambitious, resourceful, and determined to provide the highest quality service and advice to clients, Brian specializes in cybersecurity, IT control best practices, and disaster recovery services. Today, Sean and Brian will discuss the new challenges that are being faced on the cybersecurity and data protection front that have stemmed from the economic uncertainty that has accompanied the COVID-19 crisis. We will wrap up today's presentation with a substantial question and answer session. Take it away, Sean.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. We're so grateful that we have everybody attending today. We wanted to first highlight the agenda that we're going to discuss today, just topics on working facts and resources available as it relates to this paradigm shift that we've had with taking our work into our home environments. So some of the questions we'll talk about centered around how workforce members accomplish that, how they access company resources, and more importantly, the different threat vectors within the threat landscape that we're seeing amid the COVID-19 crisis. We'll talk about virtual private networks and what they mean. My colleague, Brian Garland, will discuss wireless access points and remote desktop services within both the company environment, but how we access them and the do's and don'ts there. And we'll also talk about physical access. And then we have some best practices and recommendations for you at the end of our presentation. So everyone here has seen this slide, the flatten the curve, if you will. First, I want to say that I hope and pray everyone's safe and healthy with your families and your work environments. I know that we've been inundated with facts. I wanted to start this webinar off with just kind of telling a story, if you will, while we're all trying our best to flatten that curve. It's important that we identify preventing another curve from growing, and that's the actual within the current global marketplace. How does cyber risk affect us during this time? So our goal is to, as security practitioners, is try to enable and empower our end users and our workforce members to look at all the different threats, but take the precautions to protect themselves and their networks from said threats. There's several resources out there, or several sources rather, that have already reported just within the last 8 weeks, several fake and malicious COVID-themed websites and emails. And the paradigm shift again of workforce members now turning their homes into their office space, if you will. That's increased significantly over the last 2 weeks, upwards of likely 20% now. So our small to medium-sized businesses may or may not have a remote workforce security policy in place, and or in some cases don't have them at all. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well. So points to remember here. So this, to be truthful, this is not a temporary event, right? Remote working is just, has just gotten a huge shot in the arm, if you will, and corporate environments, because of this crisis, are likely going to change forever. I would debate that we'll likely see after this settles down an influx in workforce members working from home in a more remote environment, and just amidst this particular crisis. This call out here of the difference between an on-prem, a work environment from remote and home to an on-premise environment. It's so different than two different types of football there, right? NFL coaches would absolutely get crushed and annihilated if they thought that they could take on a professional rugby team and still apply the same practices as they would on an NFL football field. So, again, my name is Sean Richardson, Principal and Director of Cyber Service Division here at Ray & Associates. Also have my colleague, Paul Hugenberg, who is also Principal here at Ray & Associates. He's not in attendance today. Likely he will be listening later in the presentation. Additionally, again, Brian Garland is one of our managers in the Cyber Services Division, and focuses his time and efforts on risk assessments and IT controls within our clients abroad. So let's talk about some touch points and talking points as it relates to workforce members accessing company resources. So most folks have heard the term VPN. Virtual private networks are a medium used to ensure end-to-end connections are passing securely and safely, and passing information within company networks safely. And then the last three bullets there really are kind of the standard, if you will, as it relates to protecting our identities, protecting our passwords, and so it's important to call out that strong passwords and passphrases are in identity access within our identity access management systems are critical today. I will call out that as of a few years ago, the combinations of every common password or every password out to almost 10 characters has already been compromised. So we have to kind of change our thoughts and change our approach to how we protect our systems there. When connecting to Wi-Fi and access points, wireless access points, again, the same requirements apply. It's important to ensure that you're connecting to WPA2 within your home environments, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in the webinar. And then the third and last bullet there is it's important to call out that most of your manufacturers have of home wireless routers that are not commercial grade, that come from your ISPs, that come from your cable companies, have a default username and password that are set. So 90+% of them are by default set to admin or admin password or admin and a default password. The majority of those credentials are already cataloged out there for just a common user to go out and Google, if you will.
Yeah, and Sean, if I may, this is Brian. So just
absolutely,
again, putting this in a veil, and Sean touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but with the paradigm shift of entities moving employees into remote access type environment, a key driver that we talk about or that we see a lot in our practice is that, first and foremost, IT professionals are focused on blue term availability. So making sure that those remote users can get access to the systems that they need to keep the business functioning as it was before. But now, as we're talking through and walking through these different points, it's key from a security perspective. Now that, if we have availability established, we still need to maintain the same, restrictions, confidentiality controls that we had in place when everyone was working, on-prem, that we have in a remote access environment. And so that's trying to bridge the gap of, just as what we're seeing with people moving remote. So go ahead, Sean.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. Absolutely. That's a great call out there. And confidentiality and the privacy of our integrity of our information is critical, which is a great segue to talk about, how our workforce members authenticate the company resources or company networks. So most folks have heard the term MFA or multi-factor authentication, or also referred to as two-factor authentication. Sadly, currently less than 25% of companies are actually using multi-factor authentication. And I will tell you that this is more prominent, especially in today's threat landscape, that you absolutely should have this in place, because this eliminates a lot of easy access to Office 365 environments, connections to connectionless connections within your home networks if you're not using VPN and so on. And then the other call out is, as you can see, the last three bullets are the same as the previous slide. And I left them there because, again, I cannot stress enough, these are three core things that we should be doing as users within the workforce environment. Workforce members connecting to company resources. We need to have these constantly in our mind, and being forward thinking and having a security mindset, if you will. Ultimately, our company resources are our livelihood. If you think about it from that perspective, if our company resources are compromised, whether it be not connecting securely to the company network, then that's potentially affecting our organization as a whole. So let's talk training. Most organizations, there has been a paradigm shift as it relates to most organizations are starting to now have some sort of training program in place, or maybe even a third-party phishing or cybersecurity training program or application like KnowBe4 and some others. And so the call out here is it's important to have a security awareness training program within even the smallest of entities. We've got some of our organizations, our client base, that we have started doing just free training sessions. We do 30 to 60-minute sessions with them, just because it should be a part of their DNA. Now, I will tell you that we may have some members attending today's webinar that work in small town banks, community banks, doctors' offices, local municipalities, school systems, and so on. The call out there is you absolutely have to have some sort of training program within regulated entities. Regulated meaning there's a framework that they should have in place, and they report to some sort of regulated body. And then lastly, a simple step you can take as a business owner, as a workforce member, is, step forward and take the initiative and be that advocate, be that information security officer within your business. Take on that role. I believe it's important that while all of us should have that security mindset in present day, in the present day landscape, it's important to call out that if you have a passion for it, then let's take that to the next level and help your organizations across the board. So everyone has heard of the term phishing? All right. So we've talked about training. We've talked about different things that we should be doing, basic best practices as it relates to connecting through VPNs and utilizing passphrases, strong passphrases. Now let's talk about a little bit of the threat. So what is phishing? Phishing is a way to potentially connect to a network through sending emails purporting information that looks reputable. We've got some examples here in the webinar today specific to the COVID-19 events. But frankly, the attackers have gotten more and more advanced and creative, if you will. So it's important to keep an eye out for those crafted emails, because what happens is those emails typically have a link that connects to a command and control server or some sort of bad connection, if you will, that drops malicious code inside your environment, whether it be your Office 365 environment. Most of small businesses are operating in that space today, either in the Google Suite or the Gmail Suite or Office 365. A very simple threat vector is to send a phishing email and try to get somebody to click on that link. And then lastly, the call out is phishing is a form of social engineering. So social engineering is just a way of deceiving or manipulating those individuals by trying to convince them to divulge personal information. It happens every day, folks. So again, phishing is just one type of social engineering.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that. Oh, yep. Sorry, Sean. Yeah, just to add on that too. So again, the phishing attacks. I mean, most everybody on the call, I mean, is familiar with the structure of that. But just to put it in context, and depending on the sources of where we go for the threat intelligence, these numbers may be different. But the preponderance of distribution of malware, as we're seeing in the environment, I would say greater than 90%. We hear Sean has some statistics, but greater than 90% is delivered through email. And phishing attacks are the preponderance of that group. So as we're looking at, the different threat vectors as it relates to even COVID-19, they're utilizing these same channels and approaches, just tailoring the message that we're seeing as to what individuals are caring about now, what they're interested in terms of seeing like COVID-19 related statistics or other health related things. From a bad actor's perspective, what is the information point that we can use to get people to click on these links and to go to the websites or initiate the process where our malicious code is being downloaded.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. That's a great call out. And additionally, if you wheel back to the core purpose of this webinar today, and that is we have now taken our office environments into our homes, right? So with that said, it's very different for us. We're kind of set back by all of how now we have to try to work and do our normal routine, but within our home environment, we've got dogs barking and kids running around, and in some cases, complete silence, right? And something that we're all not used to. And so these types of attacks sometimes pull our defenses down, right? So we've got to be remain vigilant through these times. So this next slide here is simply just a slide of facts that we've presented. The number one type of successful attack to a network is just again tricking users or convincing users to click on a link, which ultimately installs some bad code and then gives either physical access or virtual access to company data. Those numbers are staggering, folks. 4 of 5 security incidents today start with social engineering and phishing attacks. And I will tell you, I will share with you that 20 plus years ago, almost 25 years ago, when I started into this industry as a communicator in the military, I can tell you that social engineering was ever prevalent then as it is now. So here are some examples of these 2 examples I'm sharing with you today are one of an email. Likely most of you have seen this snippet of this email already. The CDC and some others, cybersecurity practitioners within the industry, but also companies that are out and bringing awareness to telecommuting from home and the threats across the environments that we're seeing. This is just an example. Notice the 2 red boxes. One at the top comes from an email address that is not a .gov address, and but yet it points out in the body of the email. It's pointing to a CDC.gov website, and then on your right side there, this is an actual snippet of a website that was well-known malware that pointed to a healthcare sector website calling out COVID-19 global cases. In this case, using the word John Hopkins because most cases people see that and they're convinced automatically, right, that this is a trusted source because it comes from John Hopkins Hospital and University Hospital. So again, just some examples here. So this is a good segue now to start talking about a little bit more detail of how we connect securely. So we've talked about different do's and don'ts within or standard things that we should be doing and looking at as users connecting to company resources. Now let's talk more specific on what is a virtual private network and how does it connect. If you notice on the left there, the physical channel is either your ISP coming from your home, or while we're not, working from Starbucks or Panera Bread present day, the same rule applies that physical channel that connects you to the internet, that passes the information from the keyboard that you're working on through your ISP and to the public network, and then connecting to your local network. So that private channel, that VPN, is a secure end-to-end encrypted tunnel that allows you to communicate with company resources safely. Okay, so that's just an example and an explanation there. Now, I will share with you that there are several ways to circumvent VPNs. So it's important that you ensure a couple of things. One, your local router or wireless access point has the latest and greatest updates from the manufacturer. Additionally, that your VPN itself within your company, so we're talking about our IT professionals out there that ensure that availability is end-to-end, is connection, or the connection is there all the time. I would debate that VPN costs have gone up significantly within most company environments because, again, the workforce was less than 15% in most cases, most companies, whereas now that's flipped and it's 80+% of the workforce is now working from home. And so some of those VPNs may and the software that supports them may have not been updated, or may not have the security patches that it needed to continuously provide that safe operation. So again, these are just call outs to point connect when we're connecting to our company resources securely from home. We want to use a virtual private network that is updated and safe. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Brian, who's going to talk to you about wireless access points and remote desktop services and how they're used within our companies, but more importantly, the risks that come along with that.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And the one point, just to jump back quickly to the VPN side of it. And so Sean had hit on there, and I think it is a key point. Now that we're in this remote access environment, this is opening up the company environment to what I would say, is 24/7 access. That if somebody is able to connect in through VPN, that in theory we're not restricted anymore from the 9 to 5 time frame. And so if that's how considerations might be had from your IT department of what are the normal times that our employees, our individuals that are now working remote, when are they normally connecting, and should we be suspicious of a VPN type connection at 10 p.m. at night on a Wednesday, or 1 o'clock in the morning, or even 7 o'clock at a night. And so while VPN again is the best practice solution for remote work, considerations also have to be put in place of, okay, if there are anomalies, how do we define those as an organization, and how are we monitoring against those, to try to mitigate any risks if someone's VPN authentication process has been compromised. So just wanted to add that thought.
Thank you, Brian. And another quick call out too is we want to ensure that when you're connecting to your VPNs, that's just the connection that makes the tunnel secure. So when you go to access company resource applications, it's important to call out, and I can't stress this enough, and that is when you go to log into your CRM, when you go to log into your QuickBooks Online, when you go to log into your Salesforce or whatever the case may be, those internal applications, it's important that you authenticate, but also completely log off of them before you disconnect that VPN from your VPN connection from your company network, because you could then potentially have an open connection for folks to potentially come inside your home network and drop some bad code, or take a man in the middle attack. Man in the middle attack is basically a way to inject some code to try to gain credentials or elevated access to company resources. So, all right, Brian, take it away.
Great. Yeah. So from the wireless access point perspective, so again, the question is, what important guidelines should your workforce members consider when using or connecting to wireless access points? And so Sean had touched on it a little bit earlier, but if we're talking about in the home environment where you have hardware that your employees are using to connect to the internet and connect the VPN to the home office, a lot of times that is provided by their ISPs, and those are coming at least from in a default factory setting. So default admin credentials can be established on that router or that wireless access point, and depending on the employee, maybe or maybe not, those credentials been updated to remove the default access. And so one of our call outs here is just making sure that your employees, in terms of their home wireless access points, that they've went through the process of changing those default system admin accounts for those devices, and then similarly, as those default credentials have been changed, looking to configure unique and complex passwords for the home networking devices, and even if for the SSIDs, so essentially the Wi-Fi network that's being broadcast, establishing complex authentication parameters, quote unquote passwords for that access. Additionally, on top of that, if we're looking at the home network, WPA2 level encryption to help safeguard or prevent or provide some restrictions, confidentiality of the activity that's going on in the network. So making sure have your employees make sure that when they're connecting to their network, is that it's not a wide open access point for for anybody that, is within, the appropriate distance to connect. And so going in and configuring WPA2, which will, enforce having password parameters related to that to be put in. And then the last bullet point here, and I would say most of us would probably run into the situation in terms of, family members that come in and want access to your devices, really in this environment, now that we're using it from a work perspective, is granting access to your wireless access points for known devices only. So we have a call out here for MAC filtering. So if we have, in this day and age with all the smart tablets and everything, so let's say we have 6 or 7 or 8 devices that we know, okay, these are the devices in our network that we trust. We know that these devices are updated and we can manage those. We can configure within, the wireless access point or the router, the specific MAC addresses that we want to allow to connect to our network. And essentially that's a white list of those devices and, blacklisting or denying anything that doesn't fit within those parameters. And again, I touched on it, quickly there, but maintaining current updates on all connected devices and also with the wireless access point and routers themselves, making sure that you're current in terms of firmware updates and, any patches or security updates related to those devices to try to mitigate against, any 0-day or any recent vulnerabilities that have been identified. So from a remote desktop services perspective, again, what important guidelines should we consider for RDS? And so, because now we're in this remote environment as individuals are connecting back, if we're employing an RDS type solution, as with anything else, we want to look towards stronger authentication controls. So here our first bullet point, implementing, utilizing multi-factor authentication, to provide that additional layer in terms of, users have to provide, okay, what is something that they know in terms of their login credentials and something that they have, whether it's a PIN that they're getting through a text message or other type of deployment. There are, various solutions out there that can be utilized. From an RDS standpoint, also enabling high level of, say, TLS encryption for all communications. And so depending on the device and how it's configured, the encryption level might not be set to high, might be set low or moderate. And so determining where that configuration lies for how individuals are connecting from the home environment back to the work environment is appropriate or important to secure it against any type of encryption level threats that would compromise the confidentiality of that information. And then again, it feels like we're hammering home on this point, but from an RDP perspective, as it relates to all the other systems that we're relying upon, make sure that those systems are patched and up to date with the most current security patches. And then the last bullet point here is a feature within RDS, and this is targeted more from trying to prevent what would be called a denial of service type of attack against the remote server that your employees are connecting to. So enabling and enforcing the use of network layer authentication. So that's a tech speak or a fancier term of saying that users have to authenticate at the network level before the server is initiated to pull up like their user profile. So without network layer authentication put in place, the server is performing work to get the user profile put together when users are trying to authenticate in. And so that's essentially using system resources. And so results of this risk or this threat that have been seen translate into where the bad actors will try to hit consistently that endpoint server with authentication type requests that could result in taking the server down or denial of service type of event. So that's why use of network layer authentication is recommended. And then lastly here, just want to touch on this, physical security is obviously extremely important in the corporate environment, but it's also there are unique considerations now that as people have worked and translated to be working remote that we need to consider. So here are some important guidelines to consider is, if people have even their work laptops or dedicated, corporate equipment they've taken home, still the idea of restricting access to those devices to only the individuals that should have access to it. So in most cases, being that one employee, restricting access, especially if they're sensitive, proprietary, or confidential data on those systems. So physical security in terms of that translates over. Oh, were you going to say something, Sean?
Yeah, a good example of that, Brian, would be we were recently in the last few months at a client in North Carolina where it was a healthcare organization. They were a mammography screening shop, and there was one laptop that was used by the owner and several of the staff members that was taken from the home office to several different healthcare organizations, hospitals, and so on. And so imagine the risk if that one laptop was to be lost or stolen, and the amount of information that potentially could be lost as it relates to healthcare records, electronic personal healthcare information, and so on. So just an important call out here. While physical security, everyone has their own likely either a home alarm system or a dog or what have you. We wanted to highlight the importance of being safe with company resources as well. So some best practices here. The goal ultimately here is to kind of start the segue of our question. So Amani, here after these next couple of slides, we'll go ahead and start that. But again, what guidelines are you using to as a workforce member when connecting best practices, and or maybe you're unaware that some of the call outs that we've shared with you today. Additionally, when you're connecting to these company networks, how are you connecting? What mobile devices are being used? And, what is identity access management? What every single person on this call has an identity, a digital identity. So it's important to kind of use these questions as an opportunity to maybe get some talking points out amongst our attendees today. So some recommendations here. Our organization is really big on ensuring that entities, companies are performing an annual risk and vulnerability assessment at least annually. Everyone needs to do this in their environment. It's certainly most cases, folks will share with you that it's recommended, quotes, air quotes, recommended. I would debate that considering all the knowns and unknowns during this transition of the COVID-19 crisis, that we would recommend that those annual risk assessments be performed on a more consistent basis. Those risk assessments and vulnerability assessments are priceless as it relates to finding anything that might be hot, sharp, and dangerous within your environment, taking the forward-thinking steps of creating a security policy centered around teleworking or telecommuting from home, establishing a security framework. We use the NIST cybersecurity framework here at Ray Cyber Services, and there are others as well, but there are several security rules that couple with that framework. So having controls tied to your organization's business objectives are extremely critical. And then lastly, having a formal set of policies that outline those controls within your business. Here are some resources we'd like to share with you. You as an attendee today, Cyber Ohio has a great bit of resources out there. I know the gentleman that runs that very well. Mr. Frank Ficosi. It has an insurmountable amount of resources, even something as small as how to look at your home network, different do's and don'ts at home, and so on. And then the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, formerly known as U.S. CERT, linked there. And then National Cybersecurity Alliance. I know the gentleman that runs that. I met him a couple years ago. And the goal of that organization is to provide resources, training videos, and so on to just the common user, the common American user, or whomever for that matter. And then lastly, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. So NIST has a database of vulnerabilities that are out there, and that's a link to connect you to said vulnerabilities and give you an idea of what all is out there as it relates to the different software and hardware that have gaps within them and how you remediate those gaps. So I'll turn it back over to our good friend and moderator here. Look forward to your questions, and we're excited to be able to present to you today. I would hope and pray that all of you and your families are safe and healthy. And Amani, take it away.
Thank you, Sean and Brian. We're going to move on to our question and answer portion of today's presentation. So the first question to you, Sean, is a security officer the same as the privacy officer per HIPAA?
So that's a great question. The answer to that question is no. Privacy officer, as it relates to HIPAA, should be somebody that while they can wear the same hat, it's recommended that individual or that role be separated, and it can be included depending on the size of entity, a chief information security officer or an information assurance officer fill that role. But you definitely want to have somebody that is solely focused on privacy as it relates to the HIPAA security rule.
Thank you. And then Brian, should I ask my employees attend special training or at least read specific company guidance about our expectations about working from home?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I would think that from the company perspective, again, the shift with COVID that has happened is that remote access was a thing before the pandemic, and now that we're just dealing with it in a much larger perspective. So I think specific education that's going out to employees related to threats and things that they need to be aware of, that is a best practice, and we would definitely recommend that in this environment. But also maybe just even if there is remote access policies and procedures that employees should have been aware of before, the situation that we're in now, just making sure that they're aware of where your company's specific stance is and what the policies and procedures are that should be followed by those employees.
Any questions and thoughts on PCI compliance? We run credit cards through our software, but struggle with PCI compliance due to RDP.
So I'll take that one. So that's a great question and highlight there. So while PCI compliance is, if an organization has a compromise or some sort of B word, if you will, so breach is what I'm referring to there. The term breach is technically a legal term. While there is no regulation that says that PCI, that the entity itself has to report that, you can rest assured that the credit card companies will call you out in a very quick minute. A perfect example there would be we have an entity we're helping support that is being, until they're PCI compliant, they're being fined on a monthly basis in excess of $15,000. So beyond the call out to the RDP connection, there are different vectors or different ways that you can connect to said credit card system to manage or validate that. I would recommend in this case that that someone, again, come in and perform some sort of a gap assessment to determine what potential holes you might have, to close them holes, but more importantly, on a consistent basis, have someone do a PCI-based risk assessment. There are frameworks, again, the PCI DSS, Data Security Standard, overlapped with a NIST-based control framework, is something that, regardless of the size, if you're passing credit card information, you should have some sort of controls or framework in place within your entity to help thwart or mitigate that risk.
Awesome. And what are your thoughts on staff requests to have company VPN software installed on a personal device?
Yeah, so I'll start, and Brian, if you want some jump in and with some insight. So, I mean, as a security practitioner, I hear that, and my hair kind of stands on the back of my neck. And the reason that is a personal device, while it can be containerized, and then VPN environment could potentially be just accessing certain resources within that environment. It's not best practice. You don't. You as a company entity do not know the level of security or the level of protections that are in place on that individual's personal device. So therefore, there could be some potential risk gaps there. In fact, I would argue that it would likely raise your risk much higher.
To piggyback on what Sean said, I mean, if that in the normal environment where that is a company issued laptop or desktop, but there's 40 policies in place from your internal IT department in terms of the antivirus that needs to be in place, what system configurations are enabled versus disabled, certain hardening procedures that your IT department has intentionally and diligently put in place. When you take that away, and if it's being put on a personal laptop, you have no transparency in terms of what those parameters look like, or if had already been a compromise of that individual's personal workstation that they're not aware of yet. And so, to Sean's point, you may be opening yourself up to further risk from that standpoint.
Great. And then, Sean, I kind of have two questions that are kind of the same here. When given a chance to unsubscribe, should we do that, or is it simply another phishing excursion? And then also, if I click on an email to read what it says, have I been breached?
So I will address the first one. I'm assuming what they're referring to is unsubscribe to some sort of email list or some sort of potential folks that are trying to spam you, if you will, with information. If you have not subscribed, so two thoughts there. If you have not had that, if you've not requested that information ever before, then likely that is someone trying to get you to click on that link, a link within that email, or the unsubscribe link could potentially be, some sort of bad connection or bad link, if you will. So again, the best practice is if you've not asked for it, and you do not have an authenticated account to that resource or that website or that, online shopping, or whether it's, NASA's latest and greatest daily updates. I get updates from several cybersecurity entities that are trusted. If you didn't ask for it, then just delete it. The second piece, if you could re-ask that question again on the second question, Amani, please.
Sure. If I click on the email to read what it says, have I been breached?
So the answer to that is typically no. And I say typically because, again, it just depends on the situation. And more importantly, just to click on to view it, the answer to that is no. If you open it, the answer in most cases is no. Again, it depends on what that if that particular email has payload in it. Payload is a term used, is a security term used that has code or malicious code. But most cases, the present day threat vector is that email is going to have a link, because your modern day security, endpoint security and your edge security devices are going to catch anything, in most cases, that's inside attached to an email. So the days of receiving Word documents that have actual code in them, those have dwindled through the years. Again, the highest threat vector right now is through phishing and users clicking on a link. Hopefully that answered their question.
Thank you. And then, Brian, is there a difference between VPN and RDS? And if so, can you explain those differences and which is the more secure?
In terms of the more security, again, it depends on those configuration points that we walk through. But in terms of breaking it down, RDS typically is giving you a direct access or a GUI type access to whatever, if it's your workstation that is back at the company resources, giving you essentially that home screen look of your workstation there. Whereas a VPN is, and Sean had walked through this, is just establishing that point-to-point encrypted tunnel from the workstation, the desktop that your employee is using, back to the company domain and authenticating into the company resources. So it's establishing that pipeline essentially of an encrypted traffic to safeguard information that's being passed back and forth. So they are different in the sense of their deployment. Again, the RDP type of scenario is just is giving you that level of encryption, but also giving you direct access to either the workstation at the company, or if it's a user profile on a server that is being managed and maintained by your IT department. That's a key difference. Anything there, Sean, that you would like to add?
Yeah, so an additional call out, just to breaking it down to simple terms, or simple, from a simple user's perspective. Look at it from this perspective. So every one of you attending today that's sitting in front of a computer or a device, that device had 65,535 open ports, or connection ports to that device. So what that means is there are connection-oriented and connection-less ports that connect your device through a network, that all of those ports have some sort of service or something that they use, whether it's email, whether it's SSL, whether it's file transfer protocol. In the case of RDS or RDP, remote desktop programming, the remote desktop services, the common port there is port number 3389. So I remember all the way back to the early to mid 90s when that port was used to gain access to hundreds, if not thousands, of networks across globally, because the security practitioners of the world didn't realize that they had software that had this port open. So again, in very basic user terms, you've got all these different ports that, when you just turn on a computer, that could potentially have gaps, and or can give bad guys or gals or bad actors connections to your devices.
Awesome. Thank you. And then here's another question here. Do you have a preference whether a small company use a VPN versus remote desktop? And if so, what are the reasons? Are their costs significantly different?
So again, with the risk that Sean just kind of walked through there, from the RDP or RDS standpoint, I think for mostly what we see in enterprise level, or even small to medium sized business level with remote access, VPN solutions are generally the platform that are in place in terms of establishing that secure and encrypted tunnel back and forth. Just as we just outlined, that there are potential gaps from the RDP standpoint that need to be addressed and historically have presented as pretty significant threat avenues and openings to these devices. So from a cost perspective, again, VPN is a pretty standardized commercial grade, company grade remote access platform. I don't know, Sean, if you have anything to speak to there from the price standpoint, but it's a pretty commonly used solution to handle remote access situations securely.
Yeah, so if you don't have a managed service provider or an IT source person, we can certainly offline. We can talk to you about that. I really, pricing ranges significantly depending on the size of the organization, the number of endpoints or what have you. So certainly not trying to circumvent the question or what have you, but we can point you to some resources that could give you a more a clearer path and answer to what the cost would be.
Awesome. And I have one more quick question before we end it for today. For those that are working from home, are there any good scanning tools that they could run on their personal laptops to check for problems? Do you guys have any recommendations?
So there are several resources out on the internet. I certainly don't want to name specifics, but there's just some examples. Kaspersky has a platform. There are even now most of the endpoint protection type of entities that are software packages that are out there are considering the current situation are offering free scans or maybe a free license or what have you. So the goal there to answer your question directly is talk to your IT person at your local within your company, but a simple Google search and or a web search for the top 5 or 10 endpoint protection type of software scanning tools that you can use. We as security practitioners use some pretty advanced tools that are typically not used for just a home computer. However, again, I would point you to some of the endpoint protection types of software. More advanced versions and examples would be Cylance. There are others out there, Semantic and McAfee, and of course Norton is a Semantic product that is a non-commercial version that you could use as well. So that would be our recommendation.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm just going to conclude it here. Thank you guys for joining us for today's webinar on what is life after coronavirus, cyber risk, and telecommuting. We hope that Sean and Brian were able to provide you with insight that will help you better protect your organization's data during these uncertain times. If you sign off today and realize that you have additional questions, you're always welcome to reach out to Sean or Brian directly. You can also contact any of our Ray team members by simply going to the People section of Ray & Associates website at www.raycpa.com, and that's REA. Don't forget to watch your inbox for an evaluation survey, access to the recording of today's webinar, and more. Thank you again, and we hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.